Good afternoon. I'm Michael Divney, Executive Head of Thought Leadership at Chartered Accountants Ireland. You're all very welcome to this webinar to discuss the social and circular economies and how, as alternative ways of thinking, they can impact and influence mainstream business. Faced with the climate change crisis and persistent social inequality, we need new approaches for creating value and equity. I'm very grateful to our presenters and panelists for joining us today. Claire Downey, who's Policy and Research Director at the Resdiscovery Centre, which is the National Centre for the Circular Economy. Chris M.M. Gordon, who's CEO of the Irish Social Enterprise Network, and Kate van der Merwe, Irish Chartered Accountant, Sustainability Advocate, and member of the Institute's Sustainable Expert Working Group. Before I introduce our first presenter, can I ask you, the audience, to take part in a quick poll to help us gauge your general awareness of the concepts, terms, and issues we will be considering today. This will appear now on Zoom in a multiple choice format and should only take a few seconds to complete. Thank you. The webinar will begin with short presentations from our three experts, setting out key concepts, terms, and numbers. Chris M.M. Gordon on social enterprises and the social economy, then Claire Downey on the circular economy, and finally Kate van der Merwe, who will connect these approaches with finance, risk management, and arguments for an economy refresh. The presentations will be followed by a panel discussion, which we'll break from to take your questions and comments. The panel discussion will resume and then be followed by a second opportunity for you to ask questions. For this, please can you use the Q&A feature on Zoom, which you'll see at the bottom of your screens. Speaking of Zoom, my colleague Chris can now share the results of the Zoom poll. So we can see from this that the biggest result is not much. So there's not much awareness among the audience, which is good for us to know. So we'll start with the, as you'll see in the presentation, with the basics. So that gives us a good basis on which to base the discussion, and thank you for that. So to begin, it's my pleasure to introduce Chris M.M. Gordon, who's CEO of the Irish Social Enterprise Network, as I was saying. Chris is a great advocate and raconteur for Ireland's burgeoning social economy. Chris, over to you.
And thank you so much, Michael. I'm delighted to be here amongst everybody. It is an incredible honor to be with you, who I know have been involved in, for so many years, the profit side of an enterprise, but not necessarily the social or the environmental. So today I'm hoping to maybe introduce you to what is a social enterprise, perhaps what is the social economy. And through that, I want to stress that there is no such thing as a silly question. And I would like to take up on Michael's point that we as panelists here today are here to discuss things that we feel that we're passionate about, but it's not always so understood. So perhaps you've heard about these terms, or you've known a little bit about social enterprise or social economy or circular economy and circular economy organizations. Now is the opportunity to be able to ask us any questions and hopefully use the chat box, and delighted that we're able to discuss it here today. So very briefly, I suppose, I want to discuss what a social enterprise is. Now, perhaps you might think of what a social enterprise might be, and just to say that there are a spectrum of types of enterprise in Ireland. If you were to take yourself over to the private sector here on our spectrum, this would be private sector organizations selling products and services, and they do so for a profit. And they then put that profit back into their shareholders or to increase the value of the company. And on the far side, you've got charity and voluntary organizations. Generally, they are set up for a mission. They're set up to be able to tackle some social or environmental inequality. And they are generally funded by the state or through fundraising or some other types of means. A social enterprise is very much a match of both of those. Like a private enterprise, a social enterprise sells products and services. It sells something. And then it uses that profit, and profit is a good thing, to be able to help some sort of social or environmental mission. So much like a charity that is set up to help some issue, like, for example, treatment of cancer or some sort of community or environment-based entity, a social enterprise sells products and services to be able to fund that initiative. So this comes from the Social Enterprise Toolkit, socialenterprisetoolkit.ie, a free online resource for anybody looking to set up or has any questions about social enterprise. And we do have a policy in Ireland that states this as a very clear, unlike other countries, we have a very clear definition of social enterprise. So you'll get to see from the National Social Enterprise for Ireland 2019 to 2022, we have some objectives from the government to be able to help give weight to this particular area. And I realize that all of you on this webinar have read the National Social Enterprise Policy 2019 to 2022. And listen, I applaud you for doing such a thing. But if you haven't, it is one of those documents that is very easy to read and does give you a sense of where the government feels that social enterprise plays a part. Before I give you some examples, a social enterprise definition that comes from that policy is, as I just said, forgive me for all of the words, but it's an enterprise, it's a business that is set to achieve a social or environmental impact rather than maximizing profits for its owners. And it pursues its objectives by selling goods and services. It's got some other definitions governed in a transparent manner, and it has to be independent of the state. But ultimately, it is a company that is set up as a business for good. Those companies that are set up so that they have a social and environmental mission while being sustainable. Let me give you one or two examples of these. There's an organization in Ireland that is called PACE. It's been around for 50 years. It's a charity, and its mission was to try and help people who were coming out of prison. Now, if you believe, like I do, that anybody should be given a second chance, if somebody has gone into prison, has been given an opportunity, has served their time and has given an opportunity when they come out, we should be doing everything to try and make sure that they don't fall back into prison. And PACE was set up to do that. So for a good number of years, they were helping and assisting people who came out of prison and then gave them an opportunity to work in a private sector organization. But they found that working in a private sector organization wasn't always easy or possible. So they needed a halfway house. They wanted to set up a social enterprise, and they set up two main social enterprises. One of them is where they assist in developing woodwork and metalwork in making flower boxes and other types of things. And they actually sold this into Dublin City Council. So most of the flower boxes that you see around Dublin are actually made by a social enterprise, giving opportunities for people who come from prison to be able to get a second chance. And they also set up another social enterprise, that is Mugshot, and Mugshot Cafe, which I think is the great name for a social enterprise dealing with coffee, and particularly ex-prisoners or those involved in justice and probation. They set up an opportunity for people to become their own barista. And now the Mugshot Cafe, which is an opportunity for them to find meaningful employment, is now set up in areas such as the forecourts or other areas around Ireland, leading to this weird situation where some of those that are a member of these social enterprises are now serving coffee to perhaps people who put them in prison and behind bars in the first instance. But social enterprise is making a huge difference, and it does offer an opportunity for them to get further employment elsewhere. Very briefly, there is, this isn't just an Irish thing, obviously there's a worldwide thing. There is an EU Social Economy Action Plan, and it states a couple of facts and figures across Europe: 2.8 million organizations and entities employing more than 13 million people, which is roughly about 6.3% of the overall EU workforce, and somewhere between 0.6 and 9.9% of all jobs across member states. That 10% may seem a little bit strange. It means that places like Spain or Italy might have a higher employment of those involved in cooperatives or other types of organizations, whereas other countries might have a lower percentage. But there are cooperatives, mutual benefit societies, associations, including charities, foundations, and social enterprises. They're all part of the social economy. So we in the Irish Social Enterprise Network have a social enterprise definition, and we work very closely to point people in the right direction to get their ideas off the ground or their organization to the next level. We have three main pillars that we work with: advocacy, education, and network. But in Irish Social Enterprise Network, we deal with social enterprises, those in the middle of that spectrum shown earlier, and the social economy is the wider term for all of those other types of entities that exist in that space. And for me, for now, that's it about the Irish Social Enterprise Network before I hand over to my colleagues here and the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Chris, for that enlightening presentation. Like I say, if you have any questions for Chris, please can you submit them through the Q&A function in Zoom, which is at the bottom of your screens. And now I'm delighted to introduce Claire Downey, who's presenting us for us today on the circular economy. Claire's joining us from the groundbreaking Resdiscovery Centre in Ballymun on Dublin's north side. Claire, thank you.
Thank you so much, and also very grateful for this invitation to share our thoughts on the circular economy with all of you today. As Michael said, we are the National Centre for Circular Economy, and we're also a social enterprise, and we try and bring together people, ideas and resources to help inspire sustainable living and prevent waste. So just to introduce, I guess, the ideas behind circular economy, I think one of the most effective ways is to look at the resources that we have around us every day. If you're accessing this through your laptop or your phone, what I've shared here is an exploded view of an Apple iPhone, and you can see just how many parts it's made of. In fact, an average phone is made of over 300 parts and includes 85% of the stable elements in the periodic table. So an absolutely huge number of resources go into making these very complex products that we use every day. Even something as simple as a book now includes 10 different ingredients or materials, from wood pulp, of course, to chalk, to some of the coatings like polymers, and much more. So all of the products around us are becoming more and more complex. And as they do, we obviously need to source these materials from all around the globe. And these materials have to be extracted and processed and shipped and assembled and shaped and assembled again into the final products that we use. And all of this activity of extraction and production and shipping and retailing and warehousing has a huge environmental impact. It has an enormous consumption of water, of natural resources, of course, of energy as well. And the Ellen MacArthur Foundation estimates around 45% of global greenhouse gas emissions are associated with this extraction and production process. And over 90% of global biodiversity loss is also associated with our extraction and use of resources. And of course, at the end of this process, we also generate a huge amount of waste. So in our current linear economy, we continue to extract resources to make products that sometimes only last for a single use, or sometimes for a short period of time. A phone may last for 2 to 3 years before we throw it away, and then have to extract the resources to make new products to replace those that are used in this linear system. Clearly, we need to change this. And the circular economy is really about looking at how can we cut down on that raw material consumption as much as possible? How can we reduce or eliminate pollution associated with raw material extraction? How can we eliminate waste and keep the goods that we do make in circulation for as long as possible? And that means looking at the whole supply chain, right from the design stage, where 80% of the impact of a product is determined, through production, distribution, consumption, and collection. And in this, recycling is the last resort. It's a material recirculation. But the focus very much of circular economy is on products. How can we keep the products we make in circulation for as long as possible? And some examples of how circular economy comes in at these different stages. For example, in terms of design, how we can, and I referred to a phone earlier and the exploded view of a phone. Here's an example of a phone that's well designed. It's designed to last, designed for durability, and it's designed specifically to be repaired. So unlike many phones, the Fairphone is designed to be taken apart by the user, and with average household tools, you can replace the different parts. So there's how circular economy can come into design thinking. In terms of production and manufacturing, you have examples of what we call industrial symbiosis, where the waste from one system is the feedstock for another. And here I gave an example of a project that was supported by Circulera, where they took the waste from a bread making process and use it to make beer. And that's at St. Mel's Brewery. An example of distribution and what we mean by circular economy in distribution is to look at how can we distribute products, not packaging? How can we take the packaging out of the system or build in return loops for packaging? Refill, for example, is putting water refill stations around the country, so you don't need to buy plastic bottles. There are refill stores as well, and other types of return loops. Of course, there are so many examples of how you can use and reuse and repair products. And I've shared some examples here of sharing schemes, lending libraries, and the Community Resources Network, which has membership of social enterprises in this area. iFixit, which shares repair skills. In terms of collection, then how do we get the products back into the loop? There are really interesting innovations happening here around reverse logistics and collecting products back so that they're still in the very good quality and can be reused again. Or how do we use civic amenity sites to recover these products? So this, I hope, gives a sense of the types of activities that we're talking about when we discuss circular economy. In terms of where we are in Ireland at the moment and the figures that we do have, there really aren't very good measures of circular economy because, as you saw in the last slide, it spans so many different areas across the supply chain and indeed across the globe. What we do have at the moment and what government is using in our circular economy strategy, which was published towards the end of last year, is called a circular material use rate. And what we do know is Ireland's circular material use rate is very low. It's the second lowest in Europe compared to the European average. Now, it's important to note that this figure represents essentially a recycling rate. How much recovered material are we using in making new products? So it doesn't reflect reuse or prevention or any of the principles I showed on that right-hand side of the circular economy, but it is an expression and it's something that we have set targets around now, and the government aims to become, I suppose, to increase our circular material use rate to above the European average. So that's one measure that we have of circular economy here. Ireland's doing pretty well on most of our waste targets, again, all focused on our recycling rate. So again, that's the last resort in terms of circular economy, but at least we're making progress there. However, at the same time, we do know that our household waste is increasing and recycling is decreasing because it's becoming more complex. And finally, just to say, our understanding of circular economy is quite poor. And this terminology, I think, is quite opaque and difficult to get a handle on. And we did some research in the Rediscovery Centre last year to look at how many people understand or have heard of circular economy, and realized only about 25% of Irish adults have heard of it and less than 10% could really actually describe it. So we have a long way to go in terms of communicating this concept and what it means to people. Just to note the role of social enterprises in this space at the moment, we see very much them to be both innovators and practitioners. We did a survey for some research called Q2 Reuse, which was trying to measure how much reuse activity is happening in Ireland. And we found that around 48%, which was the majority of those surveyed, or 612 outlets for secondhand goods, identify as social enterprises. So we know they're really important in terms of the current reuse and recirculation of products in Ireland. But we also know that they're innovators. We recently did some videos, which will be in the link here when these slides are circulated, to showcase just the innovation coming through from social enterprises. They're piloting and trying out new ideas in this space, which is really helping move things forward. And the impact of social enterprises altogether in the circular economy in Ireland. And this figure is from the Community Resources Network's membership, is estimated to be around 117,000 tonnes of carbon savings. That's the carbon savings associated with avoiding that resource consumption. It's a very significant impact on job creation, 700 full-time employees, 800 training positions. And this has a social value, which is calculated from the Social Value Bank in the UK, of around 48 million euros. So quite a significant impact already. Finally, just to point out, I suppose, as Chris said, as a social enterprise, you have a traded income, but some of the other areas through which circular economy enterprises working in this area are operating on the basis of work integration. So many social enterprises in the circular economy work with people in different work integration schemes, community employment, community services program. We also are seeing more and more partnerships come through with government, with authorities, which is really positive, providing long-term certainty. Procurement is a very important and growing area. And as I said, there's lots of new funding coming through for circular economy pilots to really bring forward innovation and support innovation in this area. So these are the kind of key, I suppose, foundations for running circular economy enterprises in this space. So we look forward to hearing any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Claire. I'll just, that was a really thought-provoking presentation. Thank you. And without further ado, as you say, I will introduce Kate van der Merwe, who is a FCA and a huge supporter of the thinking and activities that go on in the Institute around sustainability, particularly. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, everybody. I'm just trying to get my slide deck up and working. 1 second. Apologies. There's always got to be one, and it's me. So hello, everybody. You're very welcome, and thank you for your time today. I just wanted to build upon Claire and Chris's excellent presentations. Hopefully, they've got you excited and perhaps a little bit more informed and aware of the circular economy and social economy. And I just wanted to, my goal is to put a bit more of a finance lens on that and bring them together. So I suppose the quick finance setting, I think often we can forget that we do actually have a public interest duty as finance professionals. So I just wanted to emphasize, across multiple finance bodies, we have ethics that we adhere to, and within that is acting in the public interest, as well as promoting and ensuring high professional and ethical standards. And then to focus in, obviously being a Chartered Accountants Ireland webinar, to focus in on the vision and values of Chartered Accountants Ireland, where there's, I suppose I emphasize the for tomorrow and for good, and then the purpose of that Chartered Accountants Ireland abides by is includes ethical, sustainable and prosperity for society. And just over to the right-hand side, I just wanted to, I suppose, pause on the multiple roles that we play both as chartered accountants and potentially more broadly as finance professionals, where we cover a number of different roles. Some of us are in management, some of us have more commercially focused or operationally focused roles, some are in the reporting, auditing space, some are investors, etc. So across all of these various different roles that we have, we hold a lot of influence and we have a lot of impact. And I would say that with that impact, we have a lot of responsibility as well, and we can really lend a significant amount of impact and influence to these areas such as social and circular. And now I'm going to do a little test here of, there's a very brief clip I want to play for you. And just to briefly speak over this, this is launching the Future We Choose book that Christina Figueres and Tom Rivet-Karnek produced. Stop that there. So then they go on to outline the other alternative future that we choose. And of course, this is based on, do we keep our current trajectory with our current economic models and levels of consumption and impact on climate change predominantly. It's very scientific based. It's a really good book. They also outline then a more positive future if we do a sharp about turn. And just to mention, so Christina, for anyone who isn't familiar, Christina Figueres, she's commonly attributed as the architect for the Paris Agreement. So I guess that moves us on to for me, the key question is our current model working for us? I'm sure you have already guessed what my position on this is. I certainly do not think it is working for us. I believe that we need to pursue a holistic and inclusive economy that can serve both current and future generations. As we're facing into these existential crises, climate change and biodiversity loss created by our current prevalence system, I think we need to refocus on where real value lies and re-examine our distorted assumptions. So, you know, common terms, say in finance and economy, such as utility, consumption, what these actually mean, how we define them, and really scrutinize and open up to new possibilities, new ways of operating. And I think that I would argue that our current economic model or system doesn't work on the basis of human rights framework, but also going back to sort of, as I mentioned, our core economic or finance theories as well. Now, to put this in a bit of a framework that might be more familiar and perhaps more comfortable to many finance folks out there, this is a really useful linear risk matrix that the WBCSD and others created in their linear risks report. Now, we won't, of course, go through all that text. I realize it's a fairly text-heavy slide, but if I could just focus on a key statement within that report that the authors made. So the authors said that they refer to these missing risk factors as linear risks, the exposure to the effects of linear economic business practices, and then they go on to break it down in their 4 key categories. So business practices that utilize scarce and non-renewable resources, that prioritize sales of virgin products, that fail to collaborate and fail to innovate or adapt. And they go on to say they see that these aspects will negatively impact an organization's ability to continue as a going concern. So I suppose a very strong statement and very much in financial wording. So having started on a slightly bleak note, perhaps, talking about all the reasons why I think our current model does not work, our current system is broken, and these various risks that are somewhat hidden and becoming increasingly evident, I will try to give a reason for hope. And this picture is just to illustrate how much of an active and a vibrant network there is out there, and how many organizations, how many ideas, initiatives are working to address these failures. So the background map is a map by the Real Economy Lab of all the organizations involved in what they term alternative economies. So essentially ideas that are looking to mitigate the current weaknesses. I pulled out a couple of terms that might be familiar to some people. And of course, today we're focusing in on circular economy and social economy. And just to mention there, and in fact, Claire touched on it as well, that unlike our linear economy, our very consumption heavy based economy, these ideas and economic models are not mutually exclusive. And one of the key sort of benefits and attractiveness of these is that you can often adapt and draw in ideas from these economic models and systems to combine together. So moving on then to the benefits of circular and social economies, the benefits work across economic, environmental, and social. I, of course, could have put a hang of a lot more text in here with various data and stats, but given the nature of this webinar and the time that I'm supposed to be keeping to, I just wanted to keep it very high level and actually revisit that linear risk matrix with a couple of illustrative examples to try and bring that to life. So firstly, revisiting our linear risk matrix. to focus in on resource scarcity. So earlier this year, it was reported that the global economy's most important commodities were at historically low levels, and that we had market signals of resource scarcity. Now, of course, that's a risk, but then on the flip side, I would say, for example, circular economy, it's a benefit of the circular economy because as Claire touched on as well in her presentation, a key focus of circular economy is at the design and production stage, where circular economy is very much focused on reducing the resources that it uses, reducing waste as well, shifting the focus from non-renewable to more renewable materials where possible, and also rethinking. So if possible, thinking of smart solutions to products where it can form multiple functions, for example, replacing a number of different products with one singular one. So that's just a few examples, but of course, Claire could speak much better to that. Then another example that I wanted to highlight, I found this study really interesting. So this is a study that was done by Bocconi University, EMF, and Intesa Sanpaolo in 2021. And they did a study of over 222 European companies across 14 industries. And they found that their findings of their study was that the more circular a company was, the lower its risk of default on debt over both a 1 year and a 5 year horizon, which again, speaks to the benefit of circular economy. And I would argue, I don't have a fancy little stat for you for social, but I would also say that through the COVID experience that we all had in the last couple of years, that's similarly proven a lot of the resiliency and agility of social enterprises as well. The next example that I wanted to highlight, and I think it's really quite topical and perhaps key to folks at the moment with the difficulties of hiring and retaining talent, is the example of Thriftify. It's a Dublin-based, it's a social enterprise, and also it fits in the circular economy as a circular economy support business model. It's an online retailer for 98% of Ireland's charity shops. So it gives a platform for Ireland's charity retailers to offer their pre-loved goods. It's been very successful, expanding into UK, and they were hiring for 20 new roles. And with that, they received 1,700 applications for these 20 roles, including a number of highly experienced executives that were looking at a pay cut to work in a more ethical environment. So I suppose that ties to the, we hear a lot about purpose and impact. So that really, I thought that was really interesting and highlighted it quite well. Then finally, I wanted to just finish on the legal framework. And as I'm sure you might have all picked up, that there is a lot going on in this space, and it's quite a challenge to keep up with it all. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but just a little snapshot, I suppose, to give an idea of what is happening across both EU and within Ireland, across both the circular and social economy space. So I won't go through all of those lists, but perhaps if there's anything that jump out, we can discuss in Q&A later. And with that, I'm going to try. I'm not sure if I've gone over time, but I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. That was really interesting and very informative as ever. So without further ado, I think we'll bring our panel back in and ask, I suppose, the crux question. I think Kate touched on it to a large degree there. What or how are these principles or concepts of circularity and social enterprise and social economy, how are they relevant to businesses, to mainstream businesses, that is, and how can businesses, particularly if you like SMEs, build these principles into their strategies and operations? Chris, perhaps we'll start with you.
Yeah, and it's just hit upon there with Kate. I mean, talent is obviously one of those things. Kate has just mentioned there about people who are working with organizations that would genuinely and authentically work with people. People are looking for those authentic experiences. You can't just get away with what you said in the past. People are are now going for organizations that genuinely, through their values and through their actions, are actually making an impact on the world and the planet that we live on. The question, I suppose, that I would kind of more default towards is more around social procurement. There's a lot of intersection happening now between business and social enterprise and circular economy. And an awful lot of this is not just about doing better for the bottom line for businesses, but it's also about the impact of future things that will happen, probably around procurement. Forgive me, I know my audience, but I just want to take 10 seconds to describe what is possibly the most boring word in the English language, which is procurement. Forgive me if I've offended anybody who's in the procurement departments of your organizations, but on the outside, it isn't necessarily the most exciting thing, but it is transformative for social enterprise circular economy organizations in Ireland. Why is that? Well, procurement at its most basic level, if I had the government putting out to tender 100,000 widgets, accountants love widgets. I don't know why, I don't know what they are, but let's say they go out for widgets and then two companies make the final, one is a social enterprise and one is a private enterprise. The private enterprise and the social enterprise, time, value, quality, they're all equal tenders. Should a social enterprise win? The answer is that we can, under EU directives with new procurement, it is now possible for social enterprises to also add what is called a community benefit clause. So anybody involved in procurement, or if you're in business now, or if you're involved in your organization, if you want to win future tenders, it could be that you also have to say, in addition to your time and your quality and your value, how does the community or the environment benefit as a result of you winning this tender? And social enterprises have those to the core. They're set up democratically, owned by the community that they serve, and they're usually working with people who are socially excluded or wouldn't necessarily have a job otherwise. And so I suppose just to round off the idea here of the overlap with business and you know, there's huge opportunity. If this becomes law, which it has done in other countries, which is that procurement officers could become compelled to include these clauses. There's an awful lot of businesses that will be struggling to meet that 5 or 10% requirement of that procurement. Social enterprises have it to the core, but there's many more experts on this panel about procurement, so I'll leave it to them to discuss other issues around business and social and circular.
Claire, thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, procurement is a big area, as we've discussed. You know, it could be a webinar in itself. But Claire, can you think of or mention any other, you know, areas in which these principles, concepts, practices make business sense, you know, for the whole economy?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess what I was trying to show with the circular economy diagram is how there are so many different opportunities at all levels of the supply chain to do more circular activity. And certainly in Ireland, this is still a new emerging area. There's a lot of opportunities for businesses here to explore better ways of managing resources. And this all has these knock-on effects that have come up and that certainly Kate covered really well. For example, improving resilience to supply chain shocks. We know over COVID, there were, of course, challenges in sourcing goods and products, particularly from abroad because of shutdowns due to COVID. And we saw a little bit of the knock-on effects of that here. For example, when everyone turned to bikes and wanted to buy bikes to get around, there was both a shortage of bicycles available to purchase and also of parts for bicycles. But what we saw in certainly the circular economy area of organizations refurbishing, taking bikes from civic amenity sites that would have gone to recycling, that would have been completely destroyed and only used for their material value, taking in those bikes, refurbishing them, repairing them, and being able to sell them back on. So we were essentially sourcing products locally from the local economy and keeping them in circulation. And that's how very much we were able to address that supply chain shock. It also provides, I suppose, future-proofing in the longer term around carbon emissions, so cutting down on carbon emissions through scope 3 in terms of where you source your products from, where you source raw materials from, supporting local community. And also, I think importantly, we're increasingly seeing audiences. I'm reluctant to use the words consumers because I think it typecasts everybody as someone as buyers as opposed to people. But I think audiences, people who purchase your products, are increasingly looking at values and particularly environmental accreditations or environmental, I suppose, efforts being made by companies. And we're particularly seeing this, for example, in the fashion industry, that purchasers of fashion are increasingly becoming discerning, are looking for what are companies doing to improve their sustainability. And I think businesses who take the, I suppose, who make the move and first movers in this area will benefit from engaging those audiences and being ahead of the curve. So I think they're really important considerations.
That's great. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if you pardon the analogy, it's there's an ecosystem that's in place there. You know, customers, you know, investors, employees all have an expectation now that companies will behave in a certain way, and I suppose the overarching factor is the Paris Agreement, and there's there is agreement, and there is an aim to meet the 2050 goals, as Kate was pointing out. But Kate, you know, could you comment on how, you know, there's been a fundamental shift for companies, you know, around ESG disclosures, ESG reporting, the regulation around that? I mean, it's a big subject, but, you know, how do social and circular enterprises fit into that picture for companies? For if I dare call them mainstream companies, how can they support that, you know, that change?
If I can go a little bit rogue, Michael, and first just pick up on a couple of points, if you'll allow it.
Sure, yeah.
I suppose there's some elements to me, I think, that aren't actually so new in terms of innovation. Like, you know, it's a common held phrase, I guess, within finance and business, that you innovate to survive. That's just something businesses are always supposed to be doing, is to evolve with the times. And, you know, I really see this as part of that, in, you know, continuing to innovate and evolve and move with the times. I did want to briefly pick up with the resiliency piece, but I'll park that to be well disciplined and answer your question in terms of the ESG and how, I suppose, how companies and corporates adjust to this fast evolving policy landscape. And I think, in a way, rather than getting bogged down into the detail, because there are so many different initiatives, and you know, there's sustainable product initiatives coming out, there's various reporting, which probably our audience might be more familiar with. I suppose all of these are directional. They're all, the EU has set a really clear direction. They are going towards a just low carbon economy. And I think where it's almost like if you start shifting to more social enterprise type of values, to circular economy principles or strategies, you're leapfrogging. I mean, you're embedding it in. And I think there's a real risk if corporates and companies aren't listening more deeply and they're tinkering around the edges with CSR marketing, then you're really not on the same page at all, and you're in danger. And just maybe going back to that quote from the linear risk report as well. So I think it is quite holistically, this is the direction direction of travel we're going in. And for me, I see it as part of addressing those weaknesses of our current system, and perhaps tackling those. I don't want to use the term that's unfamiliar, but like the unpriced externalities in social and environmental spaces.
Go
on,
if
Chris.
you're spending more money on the marketing of your ESG than you're actually doing your SG, you're probably that's probably an issue, right, Kate?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we're seeing there's so much debate and stuff, heated debate, and companies getting called out, and increasingly as well, the policy is strengthening in terms of like holding companies to account for greenwashing, for making big bold statements or commitments that aren't followed up with real action. And that's also from, I think, the customer base and public. There's very little tolerance and increasing frustration with that as well, I would say.
Like, how many people are in this call that are attendees that have been a part of an organization that said they had CSR things or environmental projects, but it didn't really impact on the day-to-day of any of the attendees or any of the employees of their business? I fully agree. You know, there is this element of like, we better say we're doing this now. But flip the script a little bit. You know, what is the benefits of being able to have a better, you know, social and environmentally aware company? It's better for the people that work there. It's better for the values. It's better for the customers. It's better for the environment. It's better for the communities they serve. It's better for the bottom line.
I also think now you've given me an opening, Chris, to go back to that other piece that I was really wanting to, about the resiliency piece, picking up on what Claire was talking about earlier. I do think, you know, with circular and social economy models, it's so circular, for example, it's a much more integrated supply chain. There's really close relationships and handoffs. And so when, you know, trouble hits, the feedback loops are much quicker. And I think similarly for social enterprises as well, you know, for example, through COVID, there was much quicker feedback loops. They were much closer to the ground, much more agile, being able to step into spaces that, you know, there was a real need for their services and products.
That's great. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be discussed around ESG and the whole regulation reporting side. It's just interesting, I think, to think about the touch points with social enterprises and circular enterprises and that kind of thinking, how it's going to cross into mainstream economic thinking, business thinking, and the kind of relationships that are going to be there in the future. In terms of the accountant or the accountancy, what do you think the impact is on the accountant's role, or the future thinking of the profession? Kate, you probably have a few ideas there. Yeah.
I actually find that really difficult to answer, Michael, because I do think, you know, as I tried to touch on it briefly at the very beginning of the presentation, I think in reality, like our membership are in so many different roles. We cover such a broad scope of roles, from project managers to decision makers within the management team, to making like operational decisions. So linking back to Chris's procurement. And then, of course, the auditors and reporting, you know, month end and that sort of thing. Like, we do cover a lot of different areas. So how it's going to impact us really depends on what area we're working in. So I suppose I would be trying to keep it high level and going, you know, depending what area you work in, it's layering in that circular, keeping it top of mind. And as you're making your decisions, as you're doing your daily tasks, sort of trying to tease out how that layers for you. But maybe also, and Chris, I can see you're keen to come in as well. And one thing I would say just to the audience, maybe it's a good point to mention it. You know, we're very interested to hear what you might want to learn more about. So if there is anything that you've heard today that you know, for next steps, please be sure to let us know.
Yeah, just on that, we're going to include another Zoom poll or quiz. Chris, my colleague, is just going to put that up now. So if you could let us know what you think the Institute could do next to raise awareness, to you know, if you like, do a deeper dive into some of the areas that we've discussed today, issues that affect you in your business or in your practice. That would be great to hear from you if you can just fill that in. I think it's up to 400 words. You'll be glad to hear. It's no longer than that. So I think we'll just we'll take a panel discussion now, or after a panel discussion rather. We'll take some questions from our participants today, those attending, and thank you again for attending. We have actually a question along those lines, which is, you know, as the survey at the start of today's webinar showed, you know, attendees, I suppose, admitted to having little knowledge about social and circular economy principles and practices. But the question is how we can spread the word and show how beneficial a move to social and circular can be for all businesses. You know, so the question is essentially about evangelizing these these great enterprises that are out there and the things they've learned and applied. So, Claire, have you any views on that?
Yeah, lots of views.
Yeah.
I guess the areas that we focus on as a way of communicating circular economy is obviously education. So events like this, adult education and vocational training, but also demonstration. And I think it's really important to see these things in action, to engage with these organizations or these activities, and get a feeling for how it really works and what the benefits are more directly. But behind that, we also are very interested in advocacy and seeing how the kind of structural changes can support businesses to move towards this area. Of course, we're talking about these huge global concepts. Circular economy is vast kind of global issues spanning all of these different countries and all of the supply chain. Social enterprise is a model of business. They both involve the word economy, interestingly, and I suppose at the moment they're not mainstream, and so we need also to find a way to create the right conditions and the right supports to bring businesses along these to make it easier for them to become more circular and more social, to engage more with these areas. Because at the moment, linear economy is the dominant model. It's what makes sense. It makes business sense at the moment. That's how our economy is structured. So in addition to telling people it's a great thing to do, and certainly there are a lot of low-hanging fruit and areas where, yeah, if you jump on board with removing all of the disposable cups from your canteen or include social clauses in your procurement, you will already benefit. But there are also lots of areas that are more complex, and we need to address those, and we need the creativity of accountants in the room also to help find solutions to this, because there's the structural problems are going to be the long game. And
do you find it a hard sell? I mean, these are concepts that are not traditionally close to, the heart of business. Making profit in order to further a social purpose. For example, correct me if I'm wrong, but reusing material rather than continually buying it, and utilizing global supply chains and so forth. I mean, Chris, it's part of your day job to sell the idea of the social enterprise. Do you find there's much pushback on that, or
Yeah, I suppose there's a criticism which says, well, if it's so good, why isn't everybody doing it? But we've got a lot of structural issues that we have over the past number of years. And I think those that have joined us in the call will realize that we're set up in this thing where we're supposed to constantly do the bottom line. And ultimately, if you take that narrow approach, it's just about maximizing shareholder value, which is about making sure that we've gross inequality in this world. We have to change that. And we also have this thing where we have, if we want to be more profitable, we have to buy in stuff cheaper and just make constant profits. There's good examples, and my colleagues here are hyper intelligent on this call, asked one of those questions about the fate of Patagonia. Patagonia was a privately held organization set up as a B corporation in the US for the past number of years. And I could go into B Corp in a future thing, but essentially it was set up to measure its social and environmental impact, and did so at an external basis. Not quite a social enterprise, didn't identify as that, but they've transferred all of the assets over now to organizations that are specifically working in the environmental sector. So now you've got this profit-making entity that makes those organizations sustainable. And I think there's a step change now towards people wanting to make an impact and be genuine about it. The impact that accountants can have is measurable and profound. When I speak, there's two things here that we're talking about today. If you're involved in an organization, how do you become more social and circular? But then there's the other thing that Claire used to represent and still does to a degree with the Rediscovery Centre, and myself with the Irish Social Enterprise Network, representing actual social enterprise and circular economy organisations. And we're not interested necessarily in the CSR. We're not interested in we've made too much profit this year, we want to give it as an oversized check. We're interested in the finance directors. We want to be in the supply chain. And I think it is important and imperative for all of your people listening today that you have a role in your organisation. The opportunity is, have you an open door to the social enterprises that might knock on it? And we're not talking about millions and millions of business going to social enterprise, social economy, circular organizations. We're talking about the 10s, 20s, the 25s, the 50,000 euros worth of services that could be provided by a social enterprise or a circular economy organization. So your organization may move towards that piece of being a bit more authentic about how you're affecting the environment and how you're affecting your communities. But those organizations that already exist, they sell products and services. They can offer those solutions now. And you asked Michael about bottom line and does it make more money? I guarantee if we include these clauses more regularly, you will lose out on public procurement if you do not have community benefit fulfilled, as in you will get it for the price and the quality and value, but you'll lose out because you can't demonstrate how's the community benefited as a result of you winning standards. I could talk about this for ages. As we
great,
know.
Chris. That was very succinct and to the point. We just have one question here, Claire, about is there any research that shows that the circular economy can help reduce costs? So that the large profit-making companies see the social economy as an asset to their businesses and shareholders?
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of big numbers that get rolled out for discussions like this. The European Circular Economy Action Plan proposes a figure of savings associated with the circular economy. There is a figure also for Ireland that was worked out, but these figures, capture this huge area of circular economy. And when you're talking about a specific business or how a specific business might benefit, it really depends on what they're working with and what goods and services are involved. So I suppose you need to treat any of these figures with caution in that regard. Okay. As I said, there are some very low-hanging fruit, some areas that make absolute business sense right now in the circular economy, in the social economy. And then there are other areas, because of the structures we work within, that don't necessarily make economic sense right now, and that we need to progress through policy, through structural changes and so on. So yeah, it depends on which side you fall on.
Thank you, Claire. So, and thank you for that question. I was conscious of the time, so I'm going to conclude today's webinar. I think we could be here for another at least half an hour, if not an hour. There's a lot of issues to cover, but as I mentioned, we had a poll, so to ask you how you think we could extend this, develop these themes further, kind of further webinars or podcasts or whatever we can develop to keep this message and keep this conversation going. Before concluding today, I'd like to give a special mention to Bootcamp, Chartered Accountants Ireland's online learning resource for secondary schools, particularly its current Be the Boss challenge, which asks students to consider in their decision-making issues we featured today, including the circular economy. If you're interested in Bootcamp, search for Chartered Accountants Ireland Bootcamp. Some of your children may be in school learning business and accounting and be interested in that. So thank you to everyone who attended our webinar today, our attendees and our participants. We hope you found it informative and useful. I'm very grateful to our panelists for their expert contributions, Claire Downey, Chris M. Gordon and Kate van der Merwe. Thank you also to Chris O'Donoghue and Sasha Brinkley for their support on event production. We hope you all have a good day. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.